Hello everybody, it's Don Stevens again. We're going to continue on our study in the book of Judges tonight with chapter 9. We've completed study of chapters 1 through 8 and we're getting ready to move on. The last few verses of chapter 8 basically gave a short introduction to chapter 9. And it came to pass, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the children of Israel turned again and went a-whoring after Balaam. And they made Baal-berith their god. And the children of Israel remembered not Jehovah their God, who had delivered them out of the hands of all of their enemies on every side. And neither showed they kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, namely Gideon, according to all the goodness to which he had showed to Israel. Now Gideon was a good man. He had a lot of admirable characteristics, but he also had a flaw. I mean, just as most men have places of weakness, Gideon, we read in here that he had 70 sons. So this was definitely a weakness. These sons were not all from one wife. They were from many different women. He had many wives, and he also had concubines. Now, one of Gideon's concubines was a woman from Shechem, and she was a Canaanite. She wasn't really of the tribes of Israel. She was a Canaanite woman living in Shechem. And from her, he had this son whose name was Abimelech. And after the death of Gideon, Abimelech, the son of Gideon, came to Shechem unto his mother's brothers. Now, although this woman in Shechem was actually a concubine to Gideon, she also had children by other men. It's important to note that. And so he came to his mother's family, the brethren, and communed with them, and with all of the family of the house of his mother's father. He said, I want to speak to all of the men of Shechem, whether it is better for you either that all of the sons of Jerubbaal, which are 70 persons, reign over you, or that one reigns over you. And remember this, I am your bone and I am your flesh. So what's happening here is he's made a proposal to these guys and reminded them that they were all in the same blood. They were related, and he was basically proposing that they not be ruled by 70 different brothers, but they agree on one leader, and that one leader should be a member of the bloodline of his family. And so his mother's brothers spoke of him in the ears of all the men of Shechem these words, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, well, after all, he is our brother. Actually, he is really half Canaanite and half Israelite. And so they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal-berith, wherewith Abimelech hired vain and light persons which followed him. Now what that really is that he went out and hired a group of vandals, robbers and bandits. And they went to his father's house at Ophrah, and they killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, being 70 persons, upon one stone, with the exception of the youngest son of Gideon, whose name was Jotham. He escaped and hid himself. And all of the men of Shechem gathered together, and all the house of Milo, and they went and made Abimelech the king, by the plain of the pillar that was in Shechem. Now what we see here is kind of it's somewhat of a creation of a kingship. It's more of a Canaanite practice. Israel at this time in history had not had any kings. They'd never had a king, and they were always ruled by judges. So we're now seeing this group of people in Shechem. They're all Canaanite origin. Yet they're a part of the whole territory that is encompassed by Israel. So they kill the sons of Gideon, with the exception of Jotham, the youngest son, and they set up this Abimelech as king. Now when it was told to Jotham, he went and stood on the top of Mount Gerizim, and he lifted up his voice, and he cried, and he said unto them, Hearken unto me, ye men of Shechem, that God may hearken unto you. So here we see the one son of Gideon who was left goes up to Mount Gerizim, and Mount Gerizim rises directly above the city of Shechem. The valley below Mount Gerizim with Mount Ebal on the backside forms kind of a natural amphitheater. So from the top of Mount Gerizim, a person can yell down and people can hear you in the valley. This is a place where when they came into the land, the men of certain tribes stood and pronounced the blessings. If they would keep the law of God to the congregation that was assembled in the valley below. So here we see the youngest son of Gideon up on top of this mount, calling down to the men of Shechem who have conspired against his family, and to his other brothers, and he had slain them all. Then he gives them this parable, which actually becomes a prophecy or a curse on them. And the parable went like this. The trees went forth on a time to anoint a king over them. Now the people of Shechem are represented by the trees in this parable, and Gideon is represented as the olive tree. And they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said unto them, should I leave my fatness, wherewith by me they honor God and man, and go to be promoted over the trees? So the trees said to the fig tree, come now and reign over us. But the fig tree said unto them, should I forsake my sweetness and my good fruit, to go and be promoted over the trees? Then they said to the vine, come and reign over us. And the vine said unto them, should I leave my wine, which cheereth God and man, to go and be promoted over the trees? But this is actually referring to the drink offerings that they offered to the Lord, that they got from first fruits of the grapes when they made their wine. They'd pour out this drink offering to God, and basically what it's saying here is, should I leave this ministry to be promoted over the trees? Now, bramble is a thorny bush. It's like a tumbleweed, and Abimelech is represented as the tumbleweed. Then said all of the trees unto the bramble, come now and reign over us. And the bramble said unto the trees, if in truth you anoint me king over you, then come and put your trust in my shadow. And if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. Now, I've never seen much of a shadow come from a tumbleweed, and you probably haven't either. The bramble bush was used mainly for kindling, and that's because it ignites pretty fast and flames up really quickly. And that's why we see the reference here to let fire come out of the bramble, but let it consume the cedars of Lebanon. Now therefore, if you had done truly and sincerely in that you have made Abimelech the king, and you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done unto him according to the deserving of his hands. That's quite an if here, isn't it? If what you have done is really right, if it's honorable, and he's speaking of this dastardly deed upon the family where they've killed everyone, and on the family of Gideon they've done some evil deeds. For my father fought for you and put his own life in jeopardy for you, and delivered you out of the hand of Midian. It seems to me that it'd be pretty difficult to find that what he had done to the sons of Gideon was right at this point. I think you'd have to agree with that. You have risen up against my father's house this day. You have slain his sons, 70 persons, upon one stone. You've made Abimelech, the son of his maidservant, the king over the men of Shechem, because he is your brother. If you have dealt truly and sincerely with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come out from Abimelech and devour the men of Shechem and the house of Milo, and let fire come out from the men of Shechem and from the house of Milo, and devour Abimelech. And then Jotham took off running. So he tells them if what they have done is right, then have at it. But if not, he's saying let there be a problem that arises, and let that problem cause you all to be burned or to burn each other. Now, if you ran at top speed, it would take you about 20 minutes to get from the valley down there to the top of the hill where Jotham was preaching his sermon. Now, it's probable that the men of the city started to chase after him, but he had a 20-minute head start. And it's a flat plain area on top of that mountain, so you can really move. And by the time they got to the top of the hill, he had already disappeared. It says he fled to a city called Beer, and Beer actually means well. So Jotham ran away and fled, went to Beer, and he dwelt there for the fear of Abimelech his brother. Now when Abimelech had reigned for 3 years over Israel, then God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. The men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the cruelty done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood be laid upon Abimelech their brother, who slew them, and upon the men of Shechem, which aided him in killing of his brothers. And the men of Shechem set liers in wait for him in the top of the mountains, and they robbed all that came along that way by them, and it was told Abimelech. Now about 3 years into Abimelech's reign, these problems, the fire we can call it, began to develop between the people in Shechem and Abimelech. This problem that arose was of God. So these guys, becoming a sort of a pirate group, they'd rob anybody that would come along the roads towards Shechem, and this was reported to Abimelech. And then this fellow Gaal, the son of Ebed, came with his brethren, and they went over to Shechem. And the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. So now we have a new player coming into the whole picture. Here we see this guy Gaal come in to the picture. He's a Shechemite, but evidently he hadn't been around. Comes with his brothers, and he gains the confidence of the people who are already somewhat at odds with Abimelech. And at the time of harvest, they went out into the fields, gathered their vineyards, they tread the grapes, and made merry, and went into the house of their God, and did eat and drink, and they cursed Abimelech. So these guys begin to get a little drunk while celebrating their harvest, and they're eating and drinking and cursing Abimelech. And then Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, "Who is Abimelech, and who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal and Zebul?" Now Zebul was the governor of the city of Shechem. But they said, "And Zebul is just his officer, served the men of Hamor." In other words, he was basically suggesting that they served the true Shechemites. Now, he wanted them to go back to Hamor, who was a Canaanite. He had inhabited and established the city of Shechem about the time of Jacob. For why should we serve him? And would to God that I was ruling over these people, then I would remove Abimelech. And now comes along, after these guys have had a few drinks and getting a little bit out of whack, they begin to brag. Too bad I'm not in charge, because I would kick them out. And then he sent a message to Abimelech, and it said, "Gather your army and come out and let's fight." You have to keep in mind that he's making all these statements within this circle of men. You know, where's Abimelech? You know, let him come out and fight me. Go get his men and come out and fight me. Now he's bragging, and it's from the influence of the wine, I'm pretty certain. Now when Zebul, who was the governor of the city, appointed by Abimelech, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was kindled. He really wasn't strong enough to put down the rebellion himself. So he sent messengers unto Abimelech privately, saying, "Behold, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his brothers are come to Shechem, and behold, they have fortified the city against you. Therefore come by night, you and the people that are with you, and lie and wait in the field, and it shall be that in the morning, as soon as the sun is up, you shall rise early and set upon the city, and behold, when he and the people that is with him come out against you, then you may do to them as you shall find occasion." So Abimelech rose up, and all the people that were with him, by night, and they laid in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entering of the gate of the city, and Abimelech rose up, and the people that were with him, from lying in wait. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, "Behold, there are people coming down from the top of the mountains. And Zebul said to him, you're just seeing the shadow of the mountains. Now he was suggesting here that he might be seeing things, perhaps shadows. As the sun is rising, maybe looking like people coming down the hill. So this Zebul, of course, knew what was going on, but he was trying to hold Gaul back as long as he could. And then Gaul spoke again and said, look, there are people coming down from the middle of the land, and another company is along the plain there. Then said Zebul unto him, where is your mouth now, where you said, who is Abimelech, that we should serve him? Is not this the people that you have despised? Go out now, I pray you, and fight with them. Now they're calling him a big mouth, saying, where is all your bragging at this point? I mean, if you're such a guy, such a man, have at it. Go out and fight with them. And Gaul went out before the men of Shechem, fought with Abimelech. Abimelech chased him, and they fled before him. And many were overthrown and wounded, even as he pursued them back at the gate of the city. And Abimelech dwelt in Arumah, and Zebul thrust out Gaul and his brethren, so that they should not dwell at Shechem. Now at this point, this guy Gaul, his forces had pretty well been decimated by the battle. So Zebul was powerful enough to expel him and his troops out of the city. And it came to pass on the morrow that the people went out into the field, and they told Abimelech. And he took the people and divided them into 3 companies. And he laid in wait in the field and looked, and behold, the people were come forth out of the city. And he rose up against them and smote them. Now evidently these folks that were still in Shechem figured that Abimelech had taken care of Gaul, so the danger had passed. There was no more problem. So the next morning, as the gates were open, they went out into the fields to do their work. The way they did their harvesting when they had their fields outside their city walls is at night the folks would come into the security of the city, most of them having small farms outside the city walls. And at daylight they would leave the protection of the wall of the city and go out to work their fields. Now this day, as they went out of the city, this Abimelech attacked them because there's still this bad blood between them. And Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward, stood at the entering of the gate of the city, and 2 other companies ran upon all the people that were in the fields and killed them. And Abimelech fought against the city all that day. And he took the city and killed the people that were in it, and he beat down the city and sowed it with salt. Now with this he conquered the city of Shechem. And the sowing of the salt was basically to destroy it, so they couldn't plant. They'd throw the salt out there so that it would destroy the ground and they couldn't plant their crops. It was really just to lay waste to the entire city. And when the men of the tower of Shechem heard that, they entered into the fortress of the house of the god Berith. And it was told Abimelech that the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. So Abimelech got to Mount Zalmon, he and the people that were with him. And he took an axe in his hand, and he cut down a bough from the trees. And he took it and laid it on his shoulder. And he said to the people, do what you have seen me do. And so the people also cut down every man his bough. And they followed Abimelech and put them against the fortress, and they set the fortress on fire upon them, so that all of the men in the tower of Shechem were cremated, about 1,000 men and women that were in the tower. Then Abimelech decided to attack Thebez. Now Thebez was about 6 miles away. He most likely believed that they were involved in this conspiracy against him. And he encamped against Thebez and took it. But there was a strong tower within the city, and all of the men and women of that city fled to the strong tower. And they shut it up and got to the top of the tower. And so Abimelech came to that tower, fought against it, and he went hard against the door of the tower to burn it with fire. So he attempted to use the same strategy that worked in the Tower of Shechem. But there was a certain woman who cast a piece of a millstone upon Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Now I really love this story. This millstone referred to here was probably one of the handheld millstones. Some millstones can weigh up to 300 or 400 pounds. You've probably seen photos of them. No doubt this wasn't one of those. I mean, it'd be impossible for most anybody, especially this woman, to be able to toss it off that roof if it were that large. They also had these smaller stones similar to what the Indians used to grind their ears of corn. They used these pestles to pound their ears of corn, which were usually about 10 inches long. And these were long enough so that they could do a lot of damage if they were thrown off a tower and landed on the skull of someone. So here we see Abimelech trying to beat down this door, and this woman heaves this rock over the side, and it hits him in the head, crushes his skull. But even after crushing his skull, it didn't kill him. He was still alive, but he was fully aware that his time had come. He was lying there dying with his crushed skull, and he was fully aware that he was going to die. And he called hastily unto his armor bearer, and he said to his armor bearer, "Take your sword and kill me. I don't want men to say that I was killed by a woman." You know, it amazes me that pride ruled this guy's life, and now it's going to rule his death. He keeps his pride all the way up to the end. He's lying there on the ground, head crushed, knows he's going to die. And at this point in time, his main concern is that not anyone after his death will know that he was killed by a woman. Pride will get you every time. It's just amazing. And the young man thrust him through, and he died. And the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, and they departed every one to his own place. And thus God rendered the wickedness of Abimelech, which he did to his father in the killing of his 70 brothers, and all of the evil of the men of Shechem did God render upon their heads. And upon them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. So basically the fire came out and devoured them. I mean, it's interesting that he did cremate about 1,000 or so people that had found refuge in this tower. So we see somewhat of a literal fulfillment of the curse that Jotham had pronounced against Shechem and against Abimelech for their treachery when he was up on top of that mountain. Now that ends chapter 9. Next chapter we're going into is chapter 10. It's kind of a short chapter. There's a lot of information in there that I think you'll find really beneficial. I hope you're enjoying these studies. I hope you stay with them. Continue to go through them. Anywhere along here you can click on the next one and catch up if you're behind, or go ahead if I get them posted early. But I'm glad you're listening. I'm glad you're studying these with me. Please spend some time in prayer and study on your own. It's vitally important to your own life in the times in which we live. So those are just my thoughts on chapter 9 of the book of Judges. Until next time, this is Don Stephens. God bless you.